Thank you. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Warren, for this really thoughtful hearing on housing. Thank you to the panel for all of your testimony. I think it's abundantly clear when you just listen to every member here, every senator, that we all recognize that we have a housing crisis in this country. And I hope, Mr. Mayor, this provides some hope to you that we recognize we're in this together. Buying a home has never been more expensive. There are Delawareans right now who have worked to get a down payment, but for a new home, it could cost them $500,000 just to put down, to be able to afford a house. And so we know that this is a challenge. And I think about building generational wealth. I think about workforce housing. We have doctors and nurses and firefighters who can't afford housing. I think about the root causes of those who are unhoused and how we tackle this, and whether it's our veterans, our seniors, or young people. This is literally affecting everybody in this country. And so, Dr. Glazer, I wanted to ask my first question of you as the nation's most preeminent scholar on housing, land use, and the economy. Could you talk to us a little bit about, in your research, you mentioned restrictive land use policies have created an imbalance of supply and demand. And I've focused a lot on zoning reform and cutting regulatory barriers and cutting red tape in the House and now in the Senate. But could you talk a little bit about the overall economic impact of a lack of housing supply and why everybody, whether you're a small business or a family, should care?
Thank you very much, Senator, for your question. Thank you for your leadership in this topic, in this area. This is a national problem, as I mentioned in my testimony, as was mentioned by Ms. Willis. Our nation is poorer as a result of this, right? Because we move to places where it's possible to build, rather than places in which people would necessarily want to live. And that means our overall GDP is lower than it was. That means fewer tax dollars. That means less ability to meet our foreign policy requirements. All of that weakens us fundamentally as a country. I believe that we are also a country that is has less upward mobility, because we particularly regulate those communities that are really good at turning kids of poor parents into middle-income adults. Those are the areas that are most restrictive when we look across areas. And I'm relying on my colleague Raj Chetty's data on upward mobility to do that, but you really see this in the data. And it's just tragic, right? There are some parts of America that are just great at turning poor kids into middle-income adults, and we should be trying to make sure as many kids manage to get there as possible, and yet we don't, because of local land use regulations that just say no. And it is precisely because, right, these local rules have national consequences that I think it is appropriate for your committee to take up this issue. That this is no longer just an issue for one town or one area. This is an issue that in fact impacts all of us. It impacts the intergenerational accumulation of wealth, as you said. It's a redistribution across space, and it just makes us less dynamic than we could be.
And I want to put a finer point on what we've heard, that I think all of us consider local land use and zoning reforms to be critical to unlocking new housing supply. And it's why I last year introduced a bipartisan bill, the Housing Supply and Innovation Frameworks Act, in the House, and have worked to co-develop the Reducing Regulatory Barriers to Housing Act. And these bills would reimagine outdated zoning laws and cut red tape. But we also know that we need the local level support. They're the ones that are making these land use decisions. I want to jump to the issue of breaking down barriers and cutting red tape, but also talking about shared equity housing models. I think we need innovation, not just in addition to what we do on land use, we need innovation as well. And so when I think about shared equity models, I think about community land trusts and creating permanently affordable homes while still building wealth and delivering on the promise of home ownership. To the panel, do you think that shared equity models, housing models, play a role in addressing the housing crisis and achieve home ownership for moderate income Americans, or other innovative solutions that you might have? And I'll start with you, Ms. Willis.
Sure, thank you for that question, Senator. Absolutely. I think shared ownership example, and when I think about those, I think about community land trust, as you mentioned, as being a really good resource, and an example of shared equity model. And so certainly would encourage you and your colleagues to expand opportunities for community land trusts, as well as shared equity programs in general for homeownership, because it does allow opportunities for people to move into homeownership and to continue.
Thank you. I actually am preparing legislation in this area, so I will share that with the committee. But I want to, again, we will ask some more questions for the record, but again, I want to thank you all for your testimony and your work in ensuring that Americans can live a prosperous life, and that the children, like I did, my parents also lived in public housing for a while, and to be able to be the first to go into that first home that my parents bought is nothing like it. There's nothing like it. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Senator